Ooh. So good evening, beautiful people. I appreciate you all joining us tonight for our Action to Equity webinar series 2, titled Dismantling the Master's House. I just want to repeat again, thank you for joining us on this call. We appreciate you all being here with us. You could be doing anything, but you're here with us. So I want to walk you through the agenda briefly, just so you know what we'll be talking about tonight. So first, we're going to have intros. We're going to do a little grounding to ground you all in the land we're on and the work we do. Then there's going to be a little pop-ed piece talking about the Master's House and the 4 pillars of oppression that uphold the Master's House. Then we're going to have a panel. We have some really exciting panelists. They bring some really cool wisdom to the work, and I'm excited to hear from them and the work that they're doing. Then we'll have a little break. Then there'll be an opportunity for folks on this call to dive 4 pillars. We'll have breakout sessions, and there'll be some questions that you'll talk about in your breakout groups. And then after the small group breakouts, we'll come back together, and then folks will have the opportunity to share what they talked about in their groups with the larger group. And then we'll have a few next steps, a little evaluation, and we will adjourn. So that will be the agenda for tonight. Again, I'm excited to have everyone on this call. We're going to dig deep and talk about some really cool things. So I'm going to pass it to Leah just to do a little tech, just so folks are versed in how to use Zoom, because we want to make sure this is an interactive experience. So I'm going to pass it to Leah.
Thanks, Michael. I'm Leah Shepard. I'm the administrator with Wesco. And I'll just be walking us through a few of the features of Zoom that you might like to use this evening. So this is just a screenshot of Zoom that I grabbed off the internet. But on here, you'll see down in the lower left corner, we have the mute and unmute. So you can use this during the breakout session. You can also stop or start your video by using this. If you click on this little dots by your name, you can rename yourself. So if you wanted to put your name on there and perhaps like the neighborhood that you're in, so folks can see if there's any neighbors near them on the call tonight. Then we also have the chat, which is down here. So if you need any help, or if you might like to check the chat, because we'll be posting some links to things throughout the meeting. You can also chat me in there if you need help with anything. There's also reactions. So in here in the reactions, you can do a thumbs up or clap if somebody says something that you want to respond to. There's also 2 different views. So this here is the gallery view, but if you click up here in this where it says speaker view, it'll switch to the speaker view, which looks more like this. So this would be, you might like to choose this for while the panelists are speaking, because it will jump between them to whoever is speaking. Also, if you're on mobile, it does look a little different, so it looks like this, but the features are similar. You've got unmute, you start your video, and then in the more section is where you'll find your chat and your reactions. You can also swipe the screen left or right, and you'll find different views that you can use. So if you have any questions about the technical aspects, or if you need any help with anything, you can chat me, or you can email me. If something happens and you need to email to leahs@wesco.org. So I'm also going to go over our community agreements really quick. So here's our agreements for the webinar. So these are to promote our civil and loving discussion on this webinar. We're all agreeing to the following. We're going to operate from our place of highest intent, meaning that we will assume the highest intent out of folks. We'll listen for understanding. We'll be honest and open in our discussion. We'll ask questions if we have them. We'll be aware of how much space we're taking up or are not taking up. So if you find yourself speaking a lot in your breakout session, please give folks another chance to speak. Also, if you're not speaking very much, please speak up, because we really want to hear from you. We're going to honor different lived experiences, and we'll take care of ourselves. agreements. If you need help, please ask for support, or if you're in an uncomfortable situation, please let me know. Please own your impact as much as your intent. So if you say something and it hits somebody in a way that is uncomfortable for them, even if that wasn't your intent, you need to own that that was the impact of what that was. So while we strive to create a supportive and safe environment, we acknowledge that discomfort does arise, and it is okay to feel uncomfortable and remain respectful of one another. So we do need to hold each other accountable to these agreements. So if anything comes up in your breakout sessions, please hold each other lovingly accountable to these agreements, and message me if you need help with anything. So now I'm going to turn it over to Monica Morocco, who will be taking it from here.
Thanks, Leah. Hi, everybody. My name is Monica, and I'm a board member with the Westside Community Organization. Good to see you all. I'm going to lead us through a land acknowledgement and go over some of the grounding and purpose of our time together. So first and foremost, we are on Dakota homelands. This is not just a reminder of the past, it's also an acknowledgement of the present and the future. The land we are on was acquired by militarized violence, not an exchange. The architects of colonialism intentionally created systematic tactics to remove Indigenous people from the land and each other, extract wealth, and declare perpetual ownership of that land. These acts attempted to erase Indigenous people and Indigenous history, but ultimately they failed in doing so. As stated by leaders at the Native Governance Center right on Plato, it's a Native-led nonprofit here on the West Side, both the state of Minnesota and the United States government carried out genocide, ethnic cleansing, and forced removal against the Dakota as a way to acquire land. They broke promises. Despite centuries of colonial theft and violence, this is still Indigenous land. It will always be Indigenous land. Indigenous people are not relics of the past. We are still here, and we continue to demonstrate our talents and gifts amidst the backdrop of ongoing colonialism and oppression. We are worth celebrating. So tonight, we're going to take a step together in trust here in our neighborhood on this land. We are coming together from various walks of life, yet we're here united as a neighborhood for the shared purpose of understanding, accountability, and healing justice. So this is that purpose that's going to tie us to honoring each other and the history and the people of this land. So now I will pass it to Michael to get us started with his presentation.
Sweet. Thank you so much for that, Monica. So I'm going to ask you all to do a short visualization with me, if you will. If folks on this call would close their eyes, if you're willing. So imagine a big towering house. We're going to say the house is white. Imagine that this house has the feel and the aura and the energy of a plantation house. We've all seen those homes in, historical books. If you've ridden through Georgia, the South, you've seen these big towering homes with the pillars. So now imagine this house with 4 pillars. And these pillars uphold the structure of the house. But these pillars represent pillars of oppression and violence. The first pillar is capitalism. The second pillar is colonialism. The third pillar is white supremacy. The fourth pillar is patriarchy. So sit with that for a minute. Imagining the house with those 4 pillars upholding the structure of it. All right, now open your eyes. Appreciate you all walking through that like visualization with me. So the house represents America, this country, the USA, the soil that we're on. The four pillars represent the systems of oppression that uphold this country and make it function the way it does. One thing we say is that the system's not broken, it's functioning exactly how it's supposed to. It's very intentional, the oppression and violence that we see around us on the news, in the paper, it's all around us. And people benefit from that. This country was built on that, those four pillars. So Leah, if you will, I have a few slides for you because I don't want to assume that folks know what these isms are and what capitalism is and what patriarchy is, colonialism, white supremacy. So I'm going to walk you through those terms. So this is the house that I was trying to get you all to visualize. And you can see the four pillars. So you can imagine the first one being capitalism, the second one colonialism, the third one white supremacy, the fourth one patriarchy. Okay, so can you go to the next slide, Leah? All right, so capitalism, the first one that I talked about. Capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. So we see this, we talk about this in organizing, profit over people. Can you go to the next slide? All right, so colonialism. Colonialism is a practice of domination, which involves the subjugation of one people to another. So in this country's history, the thing that pops in my mind right away is the extraction of land from indigenous and native folks. Just the taking, the domination. Can you go to the next slide, Leah? So patriarchy. This one is probably the least talked about and needs to be talked about a lot more. A social system in which men hold primary power and predominate in roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property, while women are subjugated. We see this in every aspect of how this country functions, you know, women making less than men. That's a prime example. Can we go to the next word? Or white supremacy, racism. We could also throw in anti-blackness. So white supremacy and racism, the belief, theory, or doctrine that white people are inherently superior to people from all other racial and ethnic groups, especially black people, and are therefore rightfully the dominant group in any society. So I wanted to walk y'all through those because I didn't want to assume that folks on the call knew those terms. So that's why I wanted to walk you through that. And so I've been talking about the master's house and these pillars of oppression. So how do we dismantle it? This series is called, or this webinar is called Dismantling the Master's House. So let's talk about that. A quote that's near and dear to my organizing and that I live by, I actually have a tattoo on my chest that says "No one is coming to save us," is that it was quoted by Audre Lorde, who's an amazing Black feminist, queer, revolutionary organizer, activist. She said, "You can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house." And that really stuck with me because I know we can't use capitalism to fight capitalism. I know we can't use racism to fight racism. I know we can't use violence to fight violence because there's no way we can be as violent as the system. And the way that we actually dismantle this system is we target things from the root. An example is when you're gardening, you don't pull the top leafy part of a weed and say, oh, I'm done. I extracted this invasive species of plant. It's not going to come back. We're good. You didn't really do anything. That's just a Band-Aid. It's reform. That's the best way to put that. You want to dig deep and grab that weed from the roots and uproot it so that you know that it's not going to thrive. It's not going to recreate itself. It's not going to continue to be an invasive species in your garden. And that's what we're doing in organizing. We're targeting things from the root, and the way that we do that is we're targeting the public and we're targeting the folks that are most affected by these issues. So if we're working on police brutality, we're making sure that folks who are directly affected by police brutality, so we can say Black folks, Indigenous folks, are leading on that work. And before I go deeper into grabbing things by the root, I want to talk about how there's two theories of change that exist in the world. They're the most popular ones that exist. First, I want to talk about, can you go to the next slide? Cool. So there are two understandings of power and views of, or theories of change. They're the same thing. It's just like, how does change happen in the world? Most folks believe in this monolithic view of power. Can we go to the next slide, Leah? So in the monolithic view of power, you believe that a system where those at the top want you to perceive where, hold on, this is the monolithic view of power. A system where those at the top want you to perceive them as being solid and unmovable like a mountain. So when we think of monolithic power, these are like folks in the presidential role, like Trump, politicians. This view of power, you're thinking that we have to go to this person in power, this decision maker, to move this thing that we want. And the only way for us to get a win is if they give it to us. That's the monolithic view of power, that there's a figurehead we have to move to get a win. Can you go to the next slide? Now, the social view of power is what a lot of organizers believe. We believe in that motto that if we build it, they'll come. So the social view of power is distributed throughout society. People in their cooperation, consent, sharing skills, labor, knowledge and support, and legitimized authority. So basically, the system doesn't function without us. An example of this in Wesco's work, if you wanna talk about monolithic view of power versus social power, is in our tenant organizing work, for example, the housing work. We're not going to the city council and the landlords and developers and stuff first and saying like, please, please, please move this thing. We need your help to do this. You're the decision maker. No, we're looking at things from a social view of power. So we're organizing, we're going to the tenants who are directly affected by these issues, and we're organizing them, and we're running with that motto that if we build it, they'll come, because the system doesn't function without us. And so going back to targeting things from the root, we do that through that social view of power, having folks who are directly affected by these issues leading and targeting things from the root. So the folks on our panel, they're doing exactly that. And I'm really excited to be asking these folks questions because they bring a lot of wisdom to this movement, and they're directly doing work that's dismantling these systems. Can you go to the next slide? Is there a next slide? I don't think there is. So we can skip this one. Just need a time. All right. 1 second. All right. We're just going to dive into this panel. 1 second. All right, cool. So do we have Danielle, Martine Hernandez, and Ariana on the call?
Hey.
And then Leah, is it possible to pin their screens?
I think if folks go into speaker view, it should switch to who's speaking.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So, as I said before, we have some dope panelists tonight. All these folks are friends of mine, and they're doing work that's directly dismantling these 4 pillars of oppression and targeting things from the root. We have Ariana Nelson, Danielle Swift, Martine Hernandez. I want to invite each of you to just give a brief intro of who you are, your pronouns, and the work that you're doing. Let's start with Ariana.
Hey y'all. I am Ariana or Ari, either one. Sorry, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Cool. So I work with MPD 150, and I have also been doing a lot of independent organizing and organizing in support of various collectives and movements throughout the years. So my core focus though is abolition of the police and abolition of all of the bullshit systems that allow them to be in place. So I guess just your friendly neighborhood Indigenous anarchist auntie. Oh, pronouns are they and she.
Thank you. Thank you. So excited to have you, Ariana. Do you prefer Ariana or Ari?
Sorry, I keep trying to unmute myself. Just Ari right now is fine.
All right, cool. I got you. Ari.
Thanks, y'all.
Absolutely. Cool. So next, let's have Martine.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate it for the invitation. My name is Martine Hernandez. I go by he, him, and his. I am part of WESCO. I am the chair of the board of directors for the Westside Community Organization, but we are a working board, so I volunteer in different aspects wherever needed and wherever not needed sometimes. So my previous work was in Los Angeles. I've been here in the St. Paul, Twin Cities area for 3 years now, and did work as an organizer for a good, in some way, shape, or form, I've been involved in politics for over 45 years, I guess, and organizing around transportation and civil rights issues in Los Angeles, environmental justice issues. And then I worked for the County of Los Angeles with the Department of Public Social Services, where I clearly saw the population I was serving, marginalized folks, Black and brown folks, poor folks, treated, I see the treatment of them badly. If there was more, if they were white, they'd get better social services than if they were, because they were Black. So I just clearly saw, you know, the white supremacy acting out and stuff like that. And I'm here on this panel, and I thank you very much for that. So, and I'm involved with a number of other things around this Twin Cities as well.
Sweet, thank you, Martine. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, last but not least, let's have Danielle Swift, whose last name I absolutely love.
I'm Danielle Swift. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an organizer at the Frogtown Neighborhood Association, and I do organizing around anti-displacement and lots of stuff with development. A little bit of background in real estate sales and working at a community development company, and really trying to get my feet wet in some of that stuff on the east side and also in Frogtown.
Sweet. Thank you, Danielle. So we have some questions for you all, and I'll just pick who goes just to make it a little easier on folks. And I'll say them before we get started, just so you can be thinking about them. Also sent them to you all. So the first one is, how have these pillars shown up in your life? So just personal experience question. What work are you doing to dismantle these pillars? And then what upcoming work, projects, campaigns can people on this call plug into? Cool. So let's get into that first question. How have these pillars shown up in your life? And when I talk about pillars, I'm talking about capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy, patriarchy. You can speak to all, you can speak to a few, just how have these pillars shown up in your life? And let's start with Danielle.
Okay. Thank you guys for having me. So I think, man, those pillars have shown up so much in my life, and probably not as much as I have really paid attention to as I have in the last few years. And so one thing for me personally, like where white supremacy is really showing up, I'm mixed, you know, my mother is white, my father is Black. And it's really interesting as like a 30-year-old woman to dissect some of these issues of like self-esteem and, you know, just like the reflection of where I am and who I am as a person, and how much of that is tied to some of this kind of inherent white supremacy that existed within my household. And so now that I do this work, I have the language to articulate it, and to identify it. And so that's empowering, but it's a lot of hard work to do, like within my family, within like the relationship with both of my parents even. And so that's one way that it's been coming up that is surprising to me most recently. So personally there, I mean, patriarchy, I ran for office last year, and I think that I don't know if I've ever experienced patriarchy more than I did when I was running for office. And it was really telling. I am in the middle of this book called Killing Rage by Bell Hooks. And she talks about like women's place, talking about white supremacy and in politics, and how it's not like the norm for us to be in those spaces and for us to even have those conversations, how it's kind of like, oh, don't talk about that. But really jumping headfirst into the political realm, I think is where I felt patriarchy the most. And then like with colonialism, I think it's just witnessing how people are reacting to some of these changes that we have with like coronavirus, where people are freaking out. We don't know what we're gonna do, and our economy is so fragile. Where we're out for a couple weeks and, you know, we've got nothing now. We don't know what we're going to do. So it's just kind of like, it's obvious how people are forced to think a certain way because we've been conditioned to do things a certain way, when I feel like there's so much room to get back to like the basics of like growing our own food and, you know, fishing and stuff like that to become more self-sustainable, which I think kind of goes against colonialism. So this has all been very interesting to witness like in our lifetime, and those are kind of some of the things that jump to my mind first.
Sweet. Thank you, Danielle. Appreciate you. All right. So next, let's have Ariana. And I'll repeat the question too. How have these pillars shown up in your life?
Yeah, I mean,
Ari, I'm sorry, Ari.
I mean, seriously, either one is fine. Like both names. I mean, I'm hella two-spirited, so I feel like both names definitely speak to different parts of who I am, which is why I'm like, whatever. Like, I don't care. Like, I appreciate all the ways I get to show up, and I'm grateful that I get to show up safely in all of these ways. So yeah, call me whatever. So I do think a lot. I'm gonna hold this. I do think a lot about how these things do affect me, and it's actually something I've been spending a lot of work over the last 2 years really thinking about, particularly how it applies to me personally and working through that trauma. So context for folks that know me and folks that don't. About 2 years ago, as of Friday, it was my anniversary, but I was in a really bad car accident that left me with a couple of permanent disabilities, and I am undoing my own internalized everything around those things. But part of the most poignant thing for me of what I've learned and what I've been able to take away in the last 2 years is how to actually address the trauma of what living in a body under these conditions is really like, and how I can really like take those lessons, apply them internally, and then continue to do the work that I was doing like pre-car accident and post-car accident. So I have spent a lot of time thinking about capitalism, about just this really, really absolutely asinine system of a crumbling empire that we're currently living in. I was in my car accident as a result of my job at a nonprofit because of how unbelievably stressed out I was about my ability to just live and sustain myself. And that's something I'm very aware of, that if I weren't under so much stress at the time, if I weren't under such unbelievably difficult conditions that we're all living under, that like this probably wouldn't have happened. And that's something I've had to come to terms with. So I have been moving through that and moving through how that affects my work. So one of the biggest ways I have been able to resist that I have been practicing dismantling these pillars is just by saying no, a lot, and to stop engaging in white supremacy's BFF close cousin that is haste and hustle. And I think it's really, really important that we allow ourselves to slow down, that we allow ourselves to work at a pace that is actually natural, that is healthy and whole, so like whole and well for us as individuals. Because the reality is that it took us a long time to get to this point. It took us a long time to get to this massive structure, this bastardized structure of capitalism and white supremacy and patriarchy. It is going to take time to fully remove ourselves from it. And largely, like, that is my goal. That is the way I try to do my organizing and I try to do my work, is to not continuously like force myself to engage in these systems, but to actually radically ask that we move away from them altogether. So yes, like I do think that that the notion of dismantling all these things is absolutely necessary. And I really want to make it clear that this is a crumbling house. This house is already full of cracks. Like, it is working the exact way it's supposed to, but that does not mean that it is a well-built structure. Like, as far as I'm concerned, this is some like shitty drywall, like cookie cutter box out in the suburbs. Like, those houses are not built to last. And so they might look pretty, they might be comfortable if you're able to be in them, but in terms of a long-term thing, they're gonna fall. And so I don't want to keep investing in those structures and saying like, look but that, look but that, look but that. And I know it's definitely a privilege to be able to do this, but to be able to, I want to encourage folks to like try and like step back and just say all together, like, I'm not even invested in that. Like, I want to be able to build. I want to be able to build structures that work for me. I want to be able to build systems and a sense of wellness that works for me. And so a lot of my work like on an individual level and on an organizing level, is to be able to not tell people what to do, to not even tell myself what to do, but to allow myself, to allow others to try and create the sort of space that we need to really be able to envision what another future could be. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, yes, it does make sense. I appreciate you. Thank you. And I love that reminder to take it slow, and like us working at a natural pace that feels good for us is revolutionary, and is a revolutionary act. I appreciate you saying that. So now I want to repeat that question and also remind folks that later in the webinar, there's going to be space for us to unpack these things too, and dialogue with each other in our small groups. So we'll get a chance to talk. You'll get a chance to talk to other people on this call. So Martine, how have these pillars shown up in your life?
Oh God, in so many ways. I appreciate Adi's discussion about, yeah, take time to slow down, because right, these structures have been in place for thousands of years, and and worldwide, especially white supremacy. So it's going to take a while to get rid of them. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the comedian Chris Rock, but he does a routine about talking to the people in the audience and said, all you white people in this audience, there's no way you would trade places with me. No way. And I'm rich, he says. So even if he's got money, nobody wants to be that. So where white supremacy has come up in my area of life is that as a Latino, the history of a lot of countries, not just Latin American countries, but there's a caste system that was in place. The Portuguese and the Spaniards were the ones who pretty much were beginning of the slave trade. And at the bottom of the caste system were the black folks. At the top of the caste system was the white Europeans from Spain. And it all went down from there. If you got mixed, you're black and brown, black and native was a lower caste, and it got all the way down to different castes. And it's still in the minds of a lot of our people. So there's an anti-blackness that goes off and on. And I remember going to Texas, where my mother was from, and visiting relatives, and how they would throw around words. And they lived in Houston in a mostly black neighborhood, and half, and how they would just casually throw out the N-word among brown people. And I was not used to that as a kid. And then at one point when I was much older, I actually told my aunt, don't you ever use that word around me again. You can talk about it as much as you want. It just set me the wrong way. So that was like, and sometimes among my parents, though, and it was subtle kind of things. Not that they would go out and burn a cross or do anything to that level, but just subtle things that they didn't think were racist, but would. And that was a thing that was, affected me a lot when I was growing up, and because I was dark, and I didn't know who Martin Luther King was. And I knew who Martin Luther King was because I would be kidded and being told, from adults, Martin Luther King, you're Martin Luther King, because I was dark, along with a lot of other different things. So that's another thing that's going on. Patriarchy, I was the firstborn in my family, me and my sister, and I got all the goodies. I got the nice car, I got, if I tried to, my mother told me that I would try to help around the house, clean the house, or maybe sweep up, and my dad would say, no, that's for women. So when I got my own apartment many years later, friends would tell me, you live like a hamster, because stuff's lying all over the floor, newspapers on the floor, because that's what I learned. Eventually, that kind of stayed with me for a while, but I was able to clean up. But that kind of mentality is and even for my mother, the male is the highest on ranking, you can go out late at night, but your sister has to be home. You can go out, you can come back tomorrow morning as long as that's concerned, but your sister's got to be home by 10 or 11. And I see some people here smiling like Monica, and so I'm sure she's gone through that. Colonialism, I'm from LA, born and raised, and you travel the freeways and the history, just like here in St. Paul and Minneapolis, where the freeways go. They go through the black and brown communities. they end in the white communities, they start in the white communities. And yes, you might have the advantage of going on those freeways or taking the subway or taking the rail lines. But where they start and where they stop, that's what matters. And that's where white folks are at. So, you know, you use the land and extract that land to take away people's houses, take away people's lives, take away people's livelihoods. So white folks in the suburbs or white folks can get downtown and get to their jobs as lawyers and executives, et cetera, et cetera. Capitalism. When I worked for the County of Los Angeles, my caseload was, I was like working with low-income folks, 95% Black males, the majority of them with mental health issues. So they were like a disposable people. And if they had been white, if they had been a little bit middle class, they might have been tracked to a doctor, they might have been tracked to a health record, but because they were Black and brown, they got tracked into either menial jobs or in the mental health or the criminal justice system, and things like that. One of my first jobs, I remember going to apply for a job at Sears back oh God, it was in the 80s or 70s or something like that. And why did I get hired as a salesperson? And why did the Black guy get hired as a janitor? So capitalism does a weird thing on your head. So it's all tied up together, you know. I can go on and seeing where the value of where people's jobs are put at. You know, teachers get paid crap, but they're responsible for educating our children and raising them up, you know, up in the ladder of, you know, into the capitalist system, but they get paid. It's where we put our value on people. So it kind of tells you where things are at. So those are some of the things that I've always tried to find work where I'm trying to help people, and I know it doesn't pay a lot of money, but I have because I've seen how capitalism works, and I've worked for, you know, you work for a company and you see it's mainly making money, but the way that they make money, lie, cheat, steal, and I didn't want to be in a position where I could work in that, have to lie, cheat, or steal. So that's why I worked in social service. That's why I worked as an organizer. That's why I tried to work as an actor, just with the value systems that I have.
Thank you, Martine. Thank you so much. So for this next question, it goes into more of the work that you're doing. What work are you doing to dismantle these pillars? And we do have a panelist that has to hop off, so they're going to answer these coupled together. So what work are you doing to dismantle these pillars? And then the next question is, what upcoming work, projects, or campaigns can people plug into on this call? So we're going to have Danielle go first.
Thank you. So I think, man, I was thinking hard about this question when you asked me beforehand, because I feel like dismantling sounds like such this huge job, right? Like, I really think that a lot of dismantling the system comes down to what we're doing internally and our internal self-work. Are we practicing self-accountability? Are we practicing honesty? Are we practicing integrity? And, you know, I think that with the law of attraction, we have to do those internal things before we can start to see them manifest in the world around us. So I know that sounds kind of like up here, but I think things like being intentional about setting aside time to exercise, setting aside a time to learn how to grow my own food, and setting time aside to like focus on nutrition are some things that I have been doing for myself internally as a part of like dismantling the whole system. As far as like my work goes, I'm doing things with tenant protections in St. Paul alongside Martine. Big shout out to Martine. And man, and a whole coalition of other very amazing organizers, a few who are on this call. And I think like that's probably where we're really trying to get the most people to plug in right now. So the tenant protection ordinances were passed in St. Paul. It felt like forever, but it really like geared us up to move into the next steps, looking towards rent control, looking towards how do we really start to bring like, you know, critical system change. And I think that because we've got these wins under our belt now, that it's giving us some momentum. And so HENS, which is Housing Equity Now St. Paul, is a place that is kind of sacred, and we're getting ready to mobilize and pull community in, more organizations in, so that we can rev up this campaign and make some changes around housing. So that's kind of my work there. And then also, I want to be a developer, y'all. I feel like in my career long term, I'm just a contracted organizer right now. But developers kind of have this, they're the bad guy a lot of the times when it comes to community development. And it's happening every day. Development is constantly happening. And so I want to be a developer. I want to learn how to engage community and to tangibly build buildings that will help contribute to like the health of the overall community. So, and I'm starting to get my feet wet in that stuff. So especially if you're an East Sider, plug in with me more on that. There isn't anything to plug into. It's just ideas and stuff like that now, but it's really exciting to see all these pieces come together, because when I think about land use, I think about like the very beginning and conception of this country. Colonizers coming here, seeing the land, determining what they want to do with it, and moving people around when they get in their way. It's still very much the same thing that we're seeing now. So I feel like this is an age-old fight. And I think that plugging in with development, real estate, ownership, tenant rights, tenant protections, anything that have to do with housing and land use, that's the places where my work is most focused, where I'll be encouraging people to plug in. So thanks very much for having me, you guys. I have to hop off.
I want to give a shout out.
Conversation.
I need to shout out Danielle, because she is the moral compass of heads. Things come up and says, no, it's like she's the one that grounds everybody. If you want to do, I'm going to get all teary-eyed here, but.
No, I don't know how true that is. I think that it's a shared effort. And
it is a shared effort, but you help.
Days, yeah, I think that there's a real balance there. Sometimes I don't always feel on my square, and I mean, we're all only human, you know what I mean? And I'm able to come in as my full self and express my feelings and my thoughts, and it's always, those things are always listened to by my comrades, and so it really is a good organizing space. It's authentic grassroots organizing, and so you know that it's super powerful, and I can't wait for other people to get plugged in so that we can continue to grow. It's been really awesome. So thank you guys again, and I hope y'all have a great evening.
Thank you, Danielle. We appreciate you.
Peace.
Peace. All right, so now let's have Martine. So I'm going to repeat the question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, we have, what work are you doing to dismantle these pillars? And I know dismantle is big, but what's that like work that you're doing that's targeting the roots?
Well, I'd actually
afterwards, what upcoming work projects, campaigns can people on this call plug into? It does make sense for those to just flow together. So
yeah, okay, that sounds cool. Well, I don't work. I'm not working because I'm retired, which means I do work.
We still put you to work though, Mark. I'm just kidding.
Still put me to work. WESCO deals with, I mean, pretty much all of those things is part of WESCO, and I feel kind of privileged and honored to be. I'm fairly new with WESCO. 3 years ago, I met Monica Bravo at in front of a library, and she laid out what WESCO did, and I said, oh, I want to do that. I've been doing that in LA, and it's kind of similar to what I'm doing. What I appreciate when we've done definitely at WESCO is that the leadership of WESCO is challenging white patriarchy and white supremacy in a number of ways, because the leadership that we have is mostly women of color. Monica Bravo, Monica Morocco, and Monica Bryant, the 3Ms of Wesco, among other folks that are, and thankfully, the job I had before in LA, my supervisors I had were mostly women. So I'll take orders from that, and my spouse is on this line too, and I think I'll do what she says if she has to tell me most of the time. So we're dealing with things like that. Wesco also, the development of leadership of women with the Indigenous women and women of color table that actually had a problem a while back, and I guess Monica knows, and the other Monica's about, they wanted to have a summit a few years back of just women of color, and it was dealing with the city, and it was up on our website, and one white woman in the West Side caused a bunch of ruckus because she felt it was discriminatory, talked about, you know, it was discriminatory and it was going to sue. I you know, also, you know, I don't know if she's going to sue, but she just wanted to be part of this. And the energy that was spent to accommodate this one white woman, but as opposed to dealing with the energy that could have said dealing with 100 white, you know, women of color, you know, was, you know, appalling. So they were able to deal with that in a way that was, you know, they figured that out with, and respecting the space of the women of color that were around. So that's a lot of the things. And as Danielle mentioned, and I think I wanted to raise the issue with Charlotte Colanti, who's really in a lot of the work around the housing justice issues that we have dealing with capitalism, and how, you know, we're seeing more and more developers wanting to come to the West Side to, you know, make a ton of money, but at the same time, they're displacing a lot of the long-term residents. So dealing with capitalism, Charlotte, you want to take a stab at that? I wanted to invite Charlotte Colanti to talk about the housing justice work that Wesco's doing.
Thanks, Martine.
Put her on the spot.
So I think for me, the way I think about housing and capitalism, I think a central idea in capitalism is that the way we reproduce our life is controlled by very few people, and it's commodified. So the food we eat, the clothes we buy, and every aspect of your life is filtered through the item as a commodity rather than as a collectively owned or collectively produced good. And so with housing, that's equally true, where your house is no longer a right that you have. You don't have a right to housing under capitalism, but rather a house is an investment opportunity. And maybe that's for a landlord, or maybe you are trying to own your house, but you're paying off a mortgage. In that case, you still don't own your house, and the bank owns your house, and the bank is making money off of your house. So there's not actually a way under capitalism that your house, your home, isn't a commodity. So with Wesco, we're trying to organize with tenants to change this power balance in this kind of long future vision of changing the paradigm where your house isn't a commodity, but it's a right that you have, that everybody has, to a happy, safe, and like even a beautiful home. That should be something that's guaranteed for everybody. And it's not. And I think it ties really deeply into capitalism and also into colonialism, that the way we consider land is through these allotted parcels that you build your homestead on. But who builds those homesteads? It's white families. That property and that home ownership has always been tied to whiteness, and at the exclusion and on the backs of people of color, and especially Black and Indigenous folks from whom land was stolen, and then under slavery who worked the land. So I think when we think about Wesco and think about capitalism and housing, these things are really tied. And something that I've said before is that sometimes like tenant protections can seem very small, but it's all about shifting a paradigm and envisioning a different world, and like small baby steps to dismantle a system and build a new one in its place.
Thank you, Charlotte. Then that ties also with as we do see more and more developers coming into the West Side, we along with Ned Moore at Cure and Malik and other folks in the community and some folks in this room. That's where I started the work with Wesco, was around what we developed was our Equitable Development Scorecard, where any kind of developer has to go through a vetting process that's been developed by the folks in the community. What are you going to bring to the West Side, from affordable housing to safety to transportation to environmental concerns in the development, and continuing the work that we're doing with the tenant protection stuff. We just filed a lawsuit against a management company here in the West Side that has problem properties here that we found out, and we can talk more about that. I'm sure you will be hearing more about that. I mean, and ways to plug in. Once we get this COVID out of the way, we want to get out and do some door knocking for the tenant protection and for the tenant organizing that we're doing. We also do cultural work. We're going to be doing, we have murals around the neighborhood. We're going to be addressing the bridge over there on Robert Street. We've got money to take care of stuff like that and other cultural issues going on. So there's a lot of different things that we're that we want to do. I would like to start some kind of outdoors kind of work. We have a lot of youth in the neighborhood. I see kids running up and down the street on their bicycles, and is there a way to get them? Can we start a bike club here, Michael? Scooter club. I don't know, Monica Bryan. Maybe we can get some work in the future to get kayaking down the river and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different things we can do. We'd like to do as well. So.
Sweet. Well, thank you, Martine. Sorry, I was muted for a second. So now let's have Ariana go. So what work are you doing to dismantle these pillars? What's that work where you're targeting the roots? And then
Yes.
What upcoming work, projects, campaigns can folks plug into on this call?
Absolutely. So I'm going to kind of speak from two different roles I'm playing right now. First being primarily I do work with MPD 150, and we are a collective that in 2017 we put out a 150-year performance evaluation and people's history of the Minneapolis Police Department. It was also MPD's 150th anniversary, so they're we're gonna take control of the narrative. And so we are not a direct action organizing body. We're not, but rather we are a collective of organizers, of elders, of youth, of artists, librarians, historians, nerds, all of the above. And we do work to shift the narrative so that we are the collective we, the royal we, are easier to envision a police-free future, a future without violence, a future without oppression, a future that is thriving. So that is the big work, the big necessary work of when I talk about abolition and when I talk about dismantling the police, abolishing these systems, the number one hardest thing that we consistently run into is just folks not believing or not being able to envision in the moment that it can even happen because of how prevalent all of these pillars of oppression are. And so I believe, this is why I've really invested myself into this work. And it's I believe that if we can start talking about it, if we can find ways to talk about it together, if we can find ways to talk about it to one another, with one another, then the future is that much more likely. It's that much more possible. So MPD 150, about a week ago now, time doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel real, but let's say about a week. Within the last 2 weeks, we released a comic that you can go check out. You can request your copy at our website, mpd150.com. So you can request the comic. It's another collective effort of, we put out a call, comic artists responded. Now we have a comic titled Community Policing and Other Fairy Tales. So there's a fun, approachable way. I've been having fun dropping that comic during my travels all around northern Minnesota in the last month. And we also have our entire copy of our report is a free downloadable PDF on the website. We also have a bunch of zines, a bunch of shareable resource materials. So feel free to go ahead, take a look, share whatever you want from there. And we're always accepting translations of anything. We're working on some ways to get the translations out a little bit more effectively, but we are a tiny collective and doing what we can. So that is largely what's going on. Oh, and then also we're going to be releasing the report 2.0 again within the next few weeks here. We just have to get everything sent off to the printers at this point, which is really cool that it's happening. But so we have our extended report, which is essentially the same report and then a bunch of other materials. So you have the first half of it is the original report. There are some expanded sections, some expanded interviews, some expanded history. And then the remainder of the report is also like really, really envisioning a police-free future. And it was a strange moment of timing that we actually finalized the report just the week before the murder of George Floyd at the hands of the police. So the timing is hard. The timing is eerie. We have a section in there about that as well, of also recognizing that this work is still living. This work is growing and it's not done. Like, this is just a part of it. Like, we're not the first, we're not the last, and we're not the only by any means. So that's kind of the MPD 150 chunk. And then I am in the middle of a bunch of stuff. So I am one of the organizers. I have a lot of different hats that I wear, but I am really also directly involved into current community alternatives to policing. I live on the Memorial Block, and that means that I've also been a contact point for a lot of community response. And I have had the great honor and privilege of being able to work with community members directly on the ground around the 38th and Chicago Memorial site, to get security teams in, to get medics in, to kind of like in real time create as we go these alternative systems. And that's, again, it's been surreal having conversations on like a national and actually international level, because I am also like a main media contact person for a lot of this. And so I've been having conversations on large scales I foresaw happening, but not this soon. But folks asking like, okay, so abolishing the police, like that's going to happen. This is a reality that we're in now. Like, well, what are you going to put in place? And I'm just like, I don't know. It's not up to me. It's absolutely not up to me. It's not up to any one individual. It's not up to any one organizing body. It is our role of organizers to, again, create the space and to provide resources and materials so that community can decide together what change will look like, what the other systems will look like, what the other things will look like. And so I want to just like keep pushing that forward too, that like we can't, like we as organizers, we can't build the new systems. Like, it's not up to us. We can create the infrastructure and support those so that community can come together and do it themselves. So that's been a really big thing that I have just been working on, are all of the different moving pieces that's happening with security, with alternatives to 911, with community neighborhood watch, like kind of like in a way that is led by the aunties and elders on the blocks. And so a super direct way that folks can get plugged in and support is like, yes, like keep an eye on what MPD 150 is doing. We're currently in a stage of evaluating what our role as MPD 150 needs to be and what it should be now. Because ultimately, like we set out with the goal of shifting the narrative, and I think we did that. We really have shifted the narrative away, or not away from, but like really actually towards a police-free future. We put out the report, we have the material out there. And so we're currently in kind of like a reflective period of listening to community and kind of saying like, okay, like what do you want our role to be, if any at all? Like, we don't need to stay around. We're told, like, we were about to sunset as an organization, or like kind of as a collective body, as like an organizing body, because we're like, okay, cool, we did the thing. But one of the things we are considering, one of the things that is kind of rolling in the works, is kind of a seed planter academy. The way that we have talked about our work for a long time is that we're planting seeds of abolition, we're planting seeds and tending the soil, and someday there's going to be a rainfall, and oh my goodness, that rainfall happened. That rainfall is here, and all of a sudden we have this garden that is blooming and booming and growing, and it's wonderful. And now we're like, okay, now what? So one of the requests we've had again and again and again is for trainings, is for some type of education model where folks in other cities can continue to do similar work, like similar work around narrative and stuff like that. So we are currently figuring out what that could look like for us, and what to do next. But again, we're moving at the speed of the work. We're moving at the speed of trust, because to do something this big and to do it in a way that is in right relationship to people and the work and the community, it means it's going to take time. So we're moving slow, and I'm cool with that. But the stuff that does require some urgency is on the ground in Minneapolis. Ways directly to support work and affect change are to keep pushing folks to call their city council members, and to hold city council members in your own cities and your own regions accountable for promises they have made. I know St. Paul has made a lot of promises too, in terms of things that have come up in the aftermath of the revolution that we're in the middle of. So it's just really, really, really staying involved. But beyond that, like, I know it seems small, but it really is the most important thing, and that is to just keep getting to know one another. To keep being open to conversations, and to know your neighbors in your immediate neighborhood, to listen to their stories. Like, everyone has these amazing stories that we're bringing to the table, and every single story, every single want, every single need is so important. And understanding where these wants and needs, like where they're coming from, what the core issue is, like when you're listening, when you're truly listening and hearing what people want, that is when the work can really start. That's when you can really push things forward and just really boil stuff down to, like, how simple can we get it, and what needs to change to get it for us to move it forward. But beyond that, like, there are genuinely like 20 different detailed things I can go in on. So I would actually, just for the sake of time and for the sake of my own brain efficiency, I would really encourage folks to reach out to me if you have like a specific thing to offer, if there's a specific thing that you're interested in doing. I don't even necessarily had to have mentioned it, but if there's something that you're interested in, I would really love to connect, because that is my main role, as a connector. I am really, really good at connecting folks to individuals, to movement spaces, to communities, to elected officials, to organizers, to youth, to elders. Like, if you have a need, I probably know who to have you talk to. So if there's something you're interested in directly, please reach out to me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to touch on something too, because I mean,
sure.
It's amazing. I wanted to feel, and one of the things that just happened just recently, that's probably why I'm not mentioning it, but our board of directors as well. It sounds amazing, the stuff you're doing, Ari, and I want to learn from you. But our board of directors unanimously voted to have a statement, a declaration to defund the St. Paul police as well. We're developing a statement as we go on, and how that plays out, you know, same thing. When, you know, the analogy is, when John Kennedy said back in the 60s, if anybody's old enough to remember, he said, we're going to go to the moon at the end of this decade. He didn't know how, didn't know what to do, didn't know, he just said, go and do it. And that's the same thing. Abolish the police, we'll figure it out as we go along. And that's another thing that we're going to be dealing with as well. And I want to give a shout out also to our housing and environmental justice work too, as well. That we also do, you know, community gardens and stuff like that. And shout out to Ellie. So we have other things like that. But that's the latest thing again. And WESCO has for many years and dealt with community safety, public safety issues, and trying to do it in a community way. How do we change that narrative? And thank you very much for being here.
Sweet, sweet. Yeah, thank you so much, panelists. This has been an amazing panel and so much wisdom brought to the space by you all. I'm also going to be reaching out, Ari, because we need an STP 150 for sure. So we'll be talking. Now I want to let folks know that we're going to be going into a 5-minute break. So if you got to use the bathroom or do anything, like take this space to do that, we're going to come back at 7:25, and then we're going to have our small group breakouts. But yeah, go to the bathroom, drink some water, stretch. All right, so we're going to come back, if you will. And so now we're going to go into our breakout groups as promised. We want to give folks the opportunity to dialogue and talk about some of these questions that the folks on the panel talked about. So I'm going to pass it to Charlotte to get you all set up.
Yeah, starting my video. Okay. All right, so the questions for the breakout groups are kind of similar to the ones the panelists answered. And we'll copy and paste these into the chat as well. So if you forget, just look in the chat. Questions are, so in this understanding of power and these pillars of oppression, how have these pillars shown up in your life? How do they affect you? And also, how do you perpetuate them? Understanding that often both things are happening. And that these pillars, although they're like discrete pillars, they're also intersectional, which means that you can be affected by the patriarchy, by white supremacy, by capitalism, all at the same time. And every person exists in different kind of like points of that intersection. So those are the questions. And then the second part is, how can we work together to dismantle these pillars? And we ask that we're going to break you off into breakout sessions, and you'll have a number on the top of the little box, and remember your number, and then assign someone to be the report back person. And then Donna will call on that person and the number of the group when we're done.
Hi, everyone. I think everyone's back. If you don't know me, my name is Donna, and I use she, her pronouns, and I live here on the West Side. It's my role now to facilitate the report back. I think that we have a small enough group that we can have a really good conversation and not just like little tidbits from each of the groups. And I was in a group myself that had a really amazing conversation. It was inspiring, lots of creative ideas, so I hope all of you did too. And with that, I think we'll start. I'm going to go in reverse order. And if hopefully you all remember the numbers of the group, the breakout room that you were in, and we'll start with group number 3. So you don't have to answer all of the questions in order, but maybe sort of focus on what were the highlights of your conversation and what do you want the rest of the group to hear about and that you had a conversation about in your group. So group number 3.
That's us. Do group number 3 want to raise their hands or see who was part of it? And Monica's over there too, hiding away. Yeah, it was a good talk. I mean, more than, I mean, we discussed being among some of us, mainly the issue of patriarchy that came up around most of the folks that either because of cultural reasons, because of the couple of folks that were, numbers of Latinos, and how they were treated by, a father who dominated the situation, or just being a woman and they was dealing with sexism. That was one of the issues that was talked about. And growing up under oppression was one of the I think one of the folks was mentioning as a child they had an oppressive stepfather, but that stepfather passed away early. So how that might have changed that person's life later on down the line, not going up into that kind of oppression, and how folks need to unlearn patriarchy, even amongst women, that there's still things in their head that are just trying to find that way of not to perpetuate it. Another main thing that didn't seem to be made was a couple of the folks in the room identify as queer. So how does homophobia translate in some of that? And you can change me if I'm saying more or less how that plays out in different structures. Let's see. Help me. Also things about how things to change, how they go about dismantling some of these pillars. As far as like, a lot of us are part of WESCO. I mean, WESCO changed its name. It was originally West Side Citizens Organization, and it changed its name to West Side Community Organization, especially to deal with white supremacy, things of that nature. Or how when WESCO, we go to city council meetings, and more often than not, we're like, only people of color there at a particular meeting. Changing the way we run our meetings, colonial structures, imperialist structures like Robert's Rules of Order, which are meant to like keep people, vulnerable, people out of the conversation. We change the way we run the meetings. So those are some of the ways that we're dealing with things like that, and dealing with patriarchy in the way that we've got the taxi, and I know it's TQ. Ellie, help me out. What does taxi stand for? Trans and queer community. Trans and queer community, plus the women of color, Indigenous women of color, Indigenous women and women of color, and the men of color group, dealing with patriarchy issues, with how to change those systems. Does anybody want to toss in something as far as, am I missing anything?
I think the only other thing we talked about, and I don't know if you just said it, was like within the communities of color.
Oh, yes, right. We have, right, thank you. Within our own communities of color, like as Latinos, for the Latinos that were in a group, which was like 3 of us in there, we have our own internalized oppression going on, and how we play that out with other people that might be, I'm a dark-skinned person, and another one was a lighter skinned person, and how they, can play against each other, struggle against each other. Oh, you're too dark, or you're too light, or you're not Mexican enough. That wasn't actually, I'm extrapolating, but how we have to work that out, and how that plays out with other communities of color. How do we, there is an anti-Blackness that runs through a lot of Latino people, as we alluded to. How do we deal with that when we're trying to organize Black folks in the neighborhood? So, anybody want to pitch in? Monica? Monica?
Great, thank you so much. So it does sound like you had a really wide-ranging conversation.
I wanted to touch real quick too. And somebody else mentioned how they grew up in a racist community, and when they go back now, they see a lot of Trump signs. And talking to a relative, they kind of came to the conclusion that a lot of people are scared to put up anything that's not Trumpian. So maybe you drive by the neighborhood and there people got Trump signs, but then there's a lot more people that don't have signs. Oh, maybe they're supporters of anti-Trump. So
that's what we're holding out hope for.
That's what we're holding out.
Yeah. It's probably true. Thank you so much. So let's move on to group number 2. Someone from group 2.
I'm not sure if were we in number 2? Anybody who was with me?
Yeah, it was Ariel, Charlotte, Ned, and Virginia.
Okay, thank you, Leah. we had, so yeah, Ariel, Charlotte, Ned, and myself. There was lots of talk about the personal work of taking time and self-care and self-awareness, and how to cultivate that and be mindful of doing that, you know, every day. And then Ned, you'll have to help me with that great quote about the bricks, but the wall, but the idea of somebody was, I think it was Charlotte was talking about the mortar between the bricks is kind of the connections that we have. As Ned was talking about making really conscious connections with people, with neighbors, white people talking to white people, say, for example, or just the way we treat everybody, making more of a connection versus, hi, how are you? You know, keeping it superficial like we are so good at doing. So that was a big part of the conversation. I didn't take notes, I'm sorry. So if anybody else in my group wants to chime in, those things are big and deep, and I think we agreed that that this is a way to approach the enormity of it, you know, of those pillars being so huge and it so ingrained, and that what can we do? We can do these things, and begin to, you know, create that in different worlds in our own everyday lives, our interactions with people. I loved the statement that Ari had made about capitalism's best BFF was haste and hustle. And that struck me a lot. That kind of sparked a conversation with us about buying into that and how we you know, project that out, we succumb to it and operate that way. And then the way we kind of continue that madness is to expect it of other people and expect it more so of ourselves. These were some of the things that we talked about.
Thanks. So I know that conversations go in lots of different directions when you're together, but did your group have time to talk about ways to come together, like so we're doing the internal work and figuring that out, but then ways to come together, to work together in dismantling, especially around the West Side?
We didn't really,
fine. I was just wondering.
We didn't really talk about that specifically, especially on the West Side. But neighbor to neighbor, you know, kind of was a general. That kind of, I guess, came into it, but nothing organized or nothing beyond that.
Yeah. Ned, did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I think where I came up a bit, and thanks, Virginia. For I think like some of that quote that you referenced, I think gets at some of that, and just it's not my quote. Got to give a shout out to Shaka Mkali, who's a longtime friend, peer, mentor, Twin Cities organizer, hip hop artist. I wasn't sure when I was like putting in like the chat to everyone, if that was just going to everyone in the small group or to everyone. But the quote is basically like what Shaka says is like, systems of oppression are like a brick wall, and the issues that we organize are like the issues that we organize around are like the bricks. And so the way that we take the system down is brick by brick. And so I think it's like, as we're building, you know, like in Wesco, like that infrastructure, like in the neighborhood, to like harness that people power, like we do that with a vision that like that can be like this like big like wrecking ball or like bulldozer that can just like knock the whole wall down. But like I think oftentimes like where we find ourselves today is in that process of like really what are some of those like bricks that we can organize around to build that power. And so I think with Wesco, whether that's, you know, tenant protections, whether it's equitable development, whether it's defunding the police, those are kind of really good like examples of what you all are doing like at the neighborhood level to begin taking that system down brick by brick.
That's really great. I love that metaphor. And it's a really interesting way to think about all of the different pieces at Wesco and how they come together and what the collective result is by all of the pieces that are moving at the same time. Thank you very much. So let's move on to group number 1. Kathleen.
Thank you, Ned. And interesting talking about, taking it down brick by brick. We used to have the brickyards right down in the, down in the flats where they kicked everybody out and all the brickwork and brick jobs with them. So now we're taking the rest of the bricks down. So, well, we talked at first, we talked about the systems that have affected us. For 3 of us out of the group, the 3 women, patriarchy was a huge thing where I know in my household, literally every day, my mother called my dad the master of the household, and we should be grateful to the master. And I like when someone said something about obey the head of the household, even if he's wrong. But very much power that really had lifelong effects on people, of oppressing young girls and women and other people and not allowing them to develop their own voice and develop a self-love or self-pride in themselves. So very, very lifelong things that some of us have still working on. And I love too that someone had talked about how Wesco is doing such great work with this idea of education being ground up as it should be, and who had worked at other organizations where unfortunately it was really for their own self-benefit and did not do much to further the left's agenda at all. So that can cause pain in people. And then we also talked about how important is, looking at some of the things that we need to do, that we need to solidify, and we really need to practice solidifying, and with young people, everybody, our narratives. Because when we have a really solid narrative and we understand how the past affects us now, in systems and personally and on a societal level, and we know we're real solid on how we can narrate that is power, a lot of power. So that's a lot of cool to have some workshops or whatever power going around teaching and working on that narrative. And then just a couple more little things again, like Virginia just talked about. We talked about how important it is to do the internal work, that you have to do that internal work. Because, and slow down and get to know our neighbors and all that. And then at the tenants work came out, big shout out for someone doing data work. And I loved something that was said too about white people, that sometimes you can be an optional volunteer. And it's kind of like symbolic of white supremacy because you have that choice. But you also can look at your talents and see what options you have to use your talents, and that putting them in a place like Wesco is really a step in the right direction of using those talents for something that's really using this ground up education. Anybody else in the group want to add anything? I would have never remembered.
No, it's a good report.
Yeah, that was excellent, Kathleen.
I don't have the good memory like some others.
So something that strikes me in listening to all of this is that this is the power of Wesco on the West Side. Like, because we have so many different voices, like I see different generations here, the conversation about it, when you have several Latinx people in the same room, they have like a nuanced conversation about gender and color and all of that. Joanne said in our group, the experience with patriarchy, being a woman and being the other, gives her an entry into understanding the dynamics between being white and being Black or POC. And so I think that this forum has really given us the opportunity to really talk about that in the context of the work that's going on in Wesco. So now it's time to turn over to really thinking about the direction that that's going to go in. And so I think Monica is going to do this part. So thank you everyone for the report back and all of the good conversations.
not fast enough with these emotion or whatever. So good evening. Folks know pretty much everybody on the call knows who I am. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank everybody for staying with us, and also for bringing all of your thoughts and your emotions, your spirits into the space with us this evening. We aim to create a space where we could come together and learn together tonight, and to unpack our lived experiences. And also, something that we believe in is that anytime we spend some time together where you're spending your time, that it's valuable and it's worth evaluating. So we want to do just a really kind of quick evaluation with that. In addition to that, just to share with you what are some next steps coming up as far as how you can get involved locally here in the neighborhood, and also broader across the city of St. Paul in partnership with WESCO and some coalition partners. So that's what I'm going to do right now. And in order to start that, I would just like to, so we had a discussion about this previously. Folks can type into the chat. Oops, Leah. Folks can type into the chat like a one word of how you felt this evening went. So if folks want to do that, then I can read from the chat and kind of close up the evaluation, and then I'll share kind of broader what work is going on. So I see encouraging. Any other thoughts for this evening? Inspired. Any other thoughts or one word for this evening? I've got encouraging and inspired. Good, but needs more time and work. But that's not one word. Bold and grounding and connection and empowering. Thank you. If anybody else wants to type one more word, you're welcome to do so. This is different for me to do an evaluation in this way. Thank you. Idealistic, okay. And fascinating. And joyful and brave. Awesome. Okay. So yeah, we set out with a big vision, with a big title tonight. And I think that all of these things, everything that everybody has mentioned is true and it's necessary for the path that we're going to go down. I think that this, obviously, it's not a sprint. It is a marathon. It is evolving. We will have all along the way different ways that this comes together, and the one run-on sentence that was in there is true. There is more work to be done. I don't know if it's idealistic or not, but I think that, at one time people thought that women couldn't vote. That was idealistic, and here we are, we vote. At one time, black and brown people couldn't use a fountain with white people. Idealistic that we could, but here we are. So the systems were created by people, and people can recreate them. So that's where we are today, and I just wanted to share with you a couple of pathways that we have at WESCO and other spaces where you can get involved a little bit more. So one is upcoming July 28th, really fast, around the corner, is our monthly Voices Forum, starting at 6:30 p.m. We'll be on Zoom, and in that forum, we work on some of these different circles, action circles, so housing justice, the history and culture, West Side 100, which is a nonpartisan get out the vote. Back it up, Leah. And so there are other circles to get involved in at the Voices Forum. On August 6th, we will be launching, in partnership with Root and Restore, a coalition partner, a book read And the book read is We Keep Us Safe by Zach Norris. It's out of Oakland. And Zach has a lifetime of experience working out of the Ella Baker Center. He is a Latino and has been doing this work for a very long time. And in this book, we invite you to dive deeper with your own neighbors on the West Side and across the city with a read about what is possible when we lead with empathy and when we, lead with restoration rather than retribution, and when we restore rather than criminalize, when we humanize rather than criminalize. So I invite you to dive deeper with us into this book, not only on the West Side, but all across the city in partnership with Root and Restore. Wesco will be hosting that first Zoom forum on August 6th. In addition to that, we have some resources available for you to dive deeper into some of the history, recommended reading, What Does Justice Look Like? The Struggle for Liberation in Dakota Homeland. And we will also send you all of these links and information in a follow-up email to today. So with that, I would just like once again to thank you for spending this time with us. And we look forward to seeing you at the upcoming events. As always, please email or call any of the Wesco staff to have further conversations or get involved. Thank you.